Okay, so hello again, everybody, and thank you for coming. As more and more people are signing in. Could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. We can go to the next slide, please.
Okay.
Okay, once again, please introduce yourself in the chat, name, title, and any affiliation. Thank you. And next slide, please. So today we're at a turning point in our process. This is our 12th meeting. Thank you all for hanging in here with us this long. We think we are finally at a point where we're going to start the actual work of putting this risk assessment tool together. So we thought it might be nice to spend a minute or two just looking at where we've been before we then move to where we're going. So next slide. So in the very beginning of this process, we talked about what our visions were for success. And here are the things that we have in our notes from then. That we wanted to work beyond FEMA requirements, which we are doing. We're developing products that people will use. We're expanding, and filling gaps in our knowledge. As we collect data sets, we'll be doing that. We should be able to create we should be able to create action items from the risk assessment in the end. And to close gaps in the current risk assessment. So that goes back to expanding and filling the gaps in our knowledge. To develop scenarios and plan for them. I don't know that we'll be actually developing scenarios with this tool, but it's possible to use. I think it will be possible to use it that way. We had another comment about using the risk assessment to be able to change the public mindset that regulations to protect people and property are restrictive. And then similarly to motivate local governments to face the reality of potential impacts from natural hazards and put this data into action. So we are doing quite a bit of what is here and hoping that as we get to the end, we'll be fulfilling the rest. Is there anything anybody would like to add to this vision of success? Marianne says, might they be protective? Can you expand on that a little?
Sure. Sorry, I'm eating lunch.
No.
So I was thinking that Bullet changed the public mindset that land use regulations to protect people and property from natural hazards are restrictive. I think the key word there is protect, right? So at least from a public health perspective and many others, I'm sure, we're trying to protect people and prevent loss of life, loss of property, etc., loss of economic assets, and all that good stuff. So I think to frame it as a positive instead of a negative, maybe.
Okay.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, this was just the comment that was noted in our notes from that very first meeting, and that was what the person said. But that I think you have a good point there to frame it more positively. I think it came from a place of frustration. Okay. Anything else before we move on? All right. So next slide, please. Okay, so what have we done? We've determined who intended users are. We've discussed a risk equation. We've explored qualitative and quantitative risk assessment methods. Maybe I'm getting you to reach back in your memories and remember some of the things that we've been over here. We've discussed the hazards, the structures, the lifelines that we wanted to be included, both the ones that are required by FEMA and others that we wanted to include. We've discussed social vulnerability and community resilience factors. We've identified data sources and will be continuing to do that. We have sent a survey to over 1,600 people that we identified as potential end users of the tool to help determine the features and functions that would be most useful. And well, that's the next thing. And we also, a small group of us developed a high-level design concept for the final tool. So we've done a lot in these last 12 meetings. We've gone over a lot of territory. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, is there a way to make this a little bigger?
I don't think so. I think this is it.
Okay, this is it.
Yeah.
Sorry. All right, so what we have here is a comparison. We have on the top with the blue lines is the potential schedule for this project. And on the bottom with the green lines is the potential schedule for the natural hazards mitigation plan update, the state plan update. And the first, oh, there we go. Okay. Can you take that to the top part, please? Oh, thanks, Nick. So where we were in January is the first line, where we thought we were going to be at that point in time, and how we thought this was going to move along. And now we're in October, the second set of red box, whoops. And we've had to make some changes along the way. So the empty boxes are where we took things out, and the kind of orangey, salmon colored, whatever that is, boxes are where we've added new things. So our timeline has changed a little bit, but it's not insurmountable. In March of 2024 is still when we're aiming to hand off results of the first run of the risk assessment to the Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan. We still don't have our grant for the Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan update, but we're told it is coming any day now. So we'll be getting started on that soon. And we're still kind of not too far off of where we thought we were going to be back in January. So the worst, the more difficult part is getting the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan update done in time. But I think with this project, we're still pretty much where we thought we were going to be when we're handing off the first set of results to the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan update. So are there questions? I know it's a lot to take in at first glance.
To clarify, the arrows indicate which portions of the risk assessment fall into the NHMP update.
Right, that's correct. So that first set of green striped boxes, or the first box in March, is where we do that handoff of the first set of risk assessment results to the NHMP. And prior to that handoff, whenever the NHMP process gets started, we'll just focus on tasks that we can do that aren't dependent on the risk assessment. And then the second box over in the second quarter of 2025 is just showing that we're still going to need, even after this project ends, we're going to still need your assistance to answer questions and help finish up the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan update. This project has a potential for a 1-year extension, which is the very bottom blue line. but the natural hazard mitigation plan does not. It has a hard deadline in September or August of 2025. So that's part of the issue of making sure that we can get that first set of risk assessment results handed off in time for the NHMP to make use of them.
Okay.
So if there are there other questions? Okay, thank you for the What?
Not seeing any.
Okay, so I'll turn it over to you now.
Okay, so the work plan that you just saw is very general, and I spent after the last meeting that we had together, I worked out a detailed work plan that takes us through the end of the risk assessment project. And most of the detail in the detailed work plan has been worked out between now and March, when we'll hand off the first run of the risk assessment for the the natural hazard mitigation plan update. So that means for the next few months, between now and the end of the year, we will have to do some heavy duty data collection. And those tasks are described in the work plan, which is in the box folder. You can look at it. It is draft still. So what we will be doing and what I will be talking about for the next little bit are these tasks 5 through 10. Do I hear a question? No, okay. So it's going to be a bit of a wild ride, but I'm going to hopefully help guide you through it. So we can go on to the next slide. Okay, so my work plan is divided into 21 tasks. The bulk of the tasks follow the risk equation that we talked about before. And for the next 3 months, we will be focusing on, like I said, tasks 5 through 10. And most of those tasks involve identifying information about hazards and potential exposures and getting those into a GIS system. So this diagram is also in the it's in the slide deck here. You can look at it, but it's a simplified view of a complex work plan. But I want to focus your attention on the October through December tasks, which involve those hazard and potential exposures. So we can go on to the next slide, which is basically just a different view of what I just told you. So this is the detailed schedule for the upgrade, put in the same format as the other larger work plan. But you can see that we're going to have some compressed activity again between now and December in data collection, so that we can hand off the first results in March. And phase 2 refers to after we hand off results, and then we start refining the tool and making it an interface for the public or for the local jurisdictions. Okay, so in order to facilitate the collection of data in those first set of tasks, I have developed a set of worksheets. They are also in box and you can look at them. And if people want to look at them here, we can, but so you'll have to let me know if you want to see them. The first set of worksheets involves natural hazards. We have a collection of natural hazards in the existing natural hazard mitigation plan. There are 12 of them, and some of them have subhazards. And Tricia, can you bring up the list of hazards and subhazards? It's a different file than the presentation.
Yeah, is it on our box?
Yes, it should be in the presentation folder.
Oh, yes.
Is it
Box or iDrive?
box? It's in the meeting materials folder.
Yeah, will you
Well,
give
if you
me
can,
a second? You continue on and then
yes.
yeah, okay.
Okay, so we have the collection is because there are some subhazards within the set of 12. The collection of hazards is a little bit bigger than 12. So what DLCD is starting to do now is we're going to fill out as much of the worksheets as we can for each of the hazards. And our focus now, and what the focus of the worksheets is collecting metadata so that we know how much information we have about the hazards, what the spatial coverage is, that's yeah, just information about it, where we can find it, who owns it, how often it's updated. So a bunch of information about the hazards itself. We will use those hazard worksheets to then get the data and build metadata as we need to. So like I said, DLCD will be filling out the bulk of these hazard worksheets, but we will likely be asking you for information where the metadata in the hazards worksheets and the hazards layers are not, it's not clear. And another part of it is that for each of the hazards, we're going to have to the extent that we can, develop probabilities of occurrence to do that risk equation. Many of the hazards already have that, some of them don't. So we will be asking the subject matter experts for each of the hazards to, if they can, and then to calculate the probability of occurrence. And these probabilities will also include how they are modified by climate change. So that's what we're collecting on the natural hazards side of things.
Chris, I have that subhazards Excel sheet up. Would you like me to read from it or how would you
No,
like?
can you share it? Is it possible to stop sharing this and share that?
Yeah.
I just want folks to see the suite of hazards that we will be dealing with. I'll
Well,
get
tell
your
me if this
question in a second, Eric.
tell me if this is
So,
the right one. Mm.
Eric has a question.
Hey there, Chris.
Yeah.
Do you want me to send over that EJ mapping tool inventory? A lot of the hazards are covered in it. It's not going to be exhaustive for the risk assessment, but it's a lot.
Yeah, sure. And what I was starting to say is that we have the suite of hazards in the existing natural hazard mitigation plan and the subhazards. We are not anticipating that we will expand on that because we don't have time at this round. Because of our compressed schedule on the natural hazard mitigation plan update, we really can't expand the suite of hazards at this time, but we possibly could later, or we likely will later.
Yeah,
But yes, so
the reason I ask is that there is some additional information that was provided by the natural resources agencies that might be useful.
okay, yeah, please send it along.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is this what you were looking for?
No, but that's okay. It was the screenshot of the subhazards from the worksheet. But it's okay. Don't worry about it. I don't want to hang things up.
Okay.
But yeah, send along that stuff, Eric. And if I need more information, I can get it from you or other people, the experts. Okay, so that's one of the worksheets. The next worksheet is assets. So these are the things that are exposed to the hazards. We have been working with OEM and internally to make a list of assets that we believe need to be considered in the risk assessment. I have developed a worksheet so we can again collect the metadata about those. So the FEMA requires that state assets, owned and operated buildings, infrastructure, community lifelines, and critical facilities be addressed. That's like the minimum that we need to do. The state also has to describe vulnerability in terms of the jurisdictions most threatened. So we have to collect information for local critical facilities as well, and community lifelines. So that it's a lot of data, but the worksheets are going to be used to help us again collect the metadata and then figure out which ones we can include. We have enough information to include in the risk assessment.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
Can you remind me do we have a definition for community lifelines, or is that a particular program?
Marion.
Okay. I'll take my hand down. Yes, it's a particular program. FEMA has lists of them, and I can share them with you after the meeting. We've been through them. Thanks, Mike. I just wanted to clarify that when Chris said we've been working with OEM to identify these assets, we actually did this together as a group back in June or July.
Oh, yes, that's true.
And we looked at all the lifelines and lifeline components and subcomponents and determined which ones we thought we could include in the risk assessment, which we could actually mitigate for. The lifelines are really for response and recovery more. So there are lots of things in there like this service or that service. Thanks, Mike. And there are some things that we felt like we couldn't mitigate for. We are working with a couple of folks, Curtis, who's on the line right now, I think, and Sarah Pulse at OEM, who are working in response and recovery to see which other things we might be able to mitigate from our perspective that would assist in response and recovery. So, for example, there are, what do you call them? PSAPs? What does that stand for?
Public Safety Answering Points. They're 911 centers.
Yeah.
Thank you. And those are things that weren't really on our radar from our point of view. There are other things like ODOT salt domes, maybe, or things like that. So we have gone through that list with a fine-tooth comb, and then we went over it again with Sarah and Curtis to see what we could do in terms of response and recovery. And so that's where we are right now. Jeff.
Yeah, I know we've discussed this before, but for the lifelines, FEMA's list is pretty solid, and FEMA touches on interdependency, interdependent lifelines, interdependent infrastructure, but almost peripherally. I know we've talked about it before. Is there a specific methodology for how we actually want to describe it or address it, since there aren't a whole lot of true data sets, but the interdependency is really it's a vulnerability in itself, in addition to how it affects each one. It's kind of like the equivalent of sea level rise is its own hazard, as well as amplifying a whole bunch of other coastal hazards.
Yeah, Jeff, that's a great point. I will add that into my the assets worksheet about interdependencies to identify them. We may not be able to address all of them, but I think just identifying them would be really helpful.
Yeah, and I don't think we have to list all of them. It's more just the recognition that it's a separate but related consideration. I know we covered it to a certain extent in the original Oregon Resilience Plan in 2013 and some of the products that came out of that. And there's been some specific reports like Ume-Stogami report, and I think 2014 that looked specifically at interdependent infrastructure with coastal healthcare facilities.
Right.
So, I mean, we have a few reports we can go back to, but it tends to be more qualitative. It's just that we have to recognize that and acknowledge in our final product that it's a relevant consideration for every jurisdiction as opposed to simply considering each infrastructure sector in isolation.
Very good point. I will add that to the asset worksheet. And by the way, all of these worksheets are available for you to look at on Box. And if you see other elements that I have not considered, please make note of them and tell me about them. But that's a good one. Thank you. Okay. The next worksheet that I put together is what I'm calling the vulnerability indicators worksheet. And these are indicators that represent states or trends that drive vulnerability to natural hazards. So our task is to develop indicators for each hazard within each of the domains that we're looking at. And one of the domains is not on here that I forgot to add, which is governance. So within each of these domains, my intention is to identify one or more vulnerability indicators that characterize that vulnerability and therefore risk. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what these vulnerability indicators are. So don't worry if you don't understand what I'm talking about right now, but I do have a worksheet for these indicators. And one of our tasks in the next 3 months will be to do some brainstorming about what indicators we think best represent the vulnerability for each hazard or each collection of linked hazards. And then we're going to have to do an exercise to hone that list down into a manageable list, because I imagine that we're going to end up with way more than we really need. Okay, so we can go on to the next slide, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what these indicators are. Okay, so what we're going to do, our task over the next several months, is to build these evaluation tables, one for each hazard and each collection of hazards. And the F numbers across the top here represent indicators. This is a sample. It's a pretend made up sample, so it doesn't really mean anything, but I wanted to give you an idea of what I mean by indicators. So they can be things like an index, a social vulnerability index, or we can break down that index into component parts. We can use population density. We can use the average age of buildings. We can use the number of buildings or critical facilities. We can use proportions, acres. We can use the number of, in floods, for example, community rating system communities. My point in showing this is that the units of measure for these indicators do not need to be the same. We're going to normalize them later. So our big task over the next several months is for each hazard to try and figure out what indicators best represent vulnerabilities to that hazard. And the worksheets hopefully will help that by giving us the information we need to put those indicators together. Now, many of these indicators, we will be calculating values for within the GIS, because it represent an intersection of a hazard and an asset. So they're not just numbers that we pick out of a book. So does anyone have any questions about these evaluation tables or what an indicator is?
Yeah, all of those indices are are basically just collections of indicators. They're all indicator-based assessments.
Yes.
And there are a couple of pretty good recent archived webinars, one out of University of Hawaii and one I think might have been sponsored by FEMA on the actual indicator selection and evaluation process. So like when FEMA did their recent update to NRI, the big thrust was that they were changing the sets of indicators they used, updating that. And that was part of why they're going away from South Carolina's SOVI and basically going to CDC's SVI. But even within that, they were choosing separate indicators from what they had done before.
Exactly. So I put the SVI up there just to say we could swallow it whole, or we could decide that we want to use parts of it for each different hazard. For example, in flood, people over and excess heat, for example, people over 65 or children are much more sensitive to flood and heat than they might be for other hazards. So we don't have to swallow these indexes whole. We can use the parts of them as appropriate for each of the hazards. So Kay says she's not sure how proportion of impervious surface is an indicator. For flood, it could be, because the more impervious surface there is in an area, the more likely you are to have high runoff, which would cause damaging floods. And also, the more likely you are not to have natural areas to absorb those floodwaters. So that's why it might be a potential indicator for natural resources. But like I said, this is a made-up example. You don't have to, these are likely not the ones that will be used for flood. But that's why I use proportion of impervious surface as an example. And for those of you that don't know, in the flood world, the community rating system is a governance system that local governments can opt into. That gives them benefits in the National Flood Insurance Program, but it also requires them to do a lot of planning around flood mitigation and protection. So that would be an example of a governance indicator for flood that indicates that there's some structure there to address flood hazards. So these tables, these evaluation tables, can be used in a variety of ways. The way that most indexes use these tables like this is they normalize the raw data and then sum across. Normalization is often done as a percentile, and then they sum across the row and then rank. There are some disadvantages to doing that, one of which is that if you have a lot of indicators within a domain, it tends to overweight that domain in the calculation. So the Promethi method that I showed last week overcomes that particular deficiency. It might have deficiencies of its own, but it does overcome that one. So if our goal is to rank areas for vulnerability, we might not want to use a straight percentile-based index. All right, any questions about this?
I don't have a direct question, Chris.
Sure.
This is Mike Howard from U of O. The only thing I'm curious about is if you've considered including churches and schools.
Yes.
Okay.
They are in our asset indicators list, partly for that reason.
Okay. Are they listed under property or under cultural or?
The schools are listed under government services.
Okay.
But we know that also they can serve as shelters.
Yep.
And the other thing you asked about, schools and
churches.
Churches.
Yep.
Right. I think we have lumped them in with churches, fraternal not churches, religious institutions, fraternal organizations.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
Great.
and
Yeah,
libraries
fraternal.
too, Marianne. Pardon?
Yeah, fraternal organizations is the other one that comes up often in smaller communities in particular. So perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, we have a category like that. And I think that the libraries are in cultural.
Yep.
And the religious and fraternal organizations, I believe, are also
right
cultural facilities.
Great. And Matt added Granges in the comments too, which is another one that comes up often for us.
That's right.
There.
They're in there too.
I think they're also under cultural. And again, a lot of the cultural facilities are big enough that they can also double as shelters.
Right. We also included convention centers or other large performance centers and that kind of thing.
Multicultural centers.
Yeah, exactly. So in developing an indicator, we might not initially anyway separately develop an indicator for each one of those kinds of buildings, but we might lump them together as a cultural asset category. So there's a lot of flexibility in building these evaluation tables. The trick will be not to over specify them. In other words, end up with too many indicators. It makes it difficult to figure out what's going on. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot out there. I'll let you know that, as you know. And I would say at the rural areas in particular, like some even grocery stores that sometimes are very important to communities and also serve as a cultural or social way of organizing people, depending on the communities. So lots of things could fit in here, but
Right.
certainly not every 7-Eleven and Safeway out there.
We do have grocery stores, and we also have food distribution centers or warehouses. We have supply lines also, I think, food supply. So yeah, I'd be happy to well, Chris will talk about it later. I won't.
Okay, so as I mentioned, are there any more questions about these evaluation tables? We're going to end up with a whole bunch of them. We're going to end up with one for every hazard, plus evaluation tables for combinations of hazards that are linked or linked hazards. Okay, so there are a bunch of ways to evaluate these tables, and that brings me to the discussion of the difference between ranks and scores. And we have to be intentional about what we're using when. So a rank would be used to identify where the most vulnerable areas are or where the riskiest areas are. So it'd just, again, be a ranked list. And a lot of indexes take the percentile summations and just rank those summations. That has some issues that we can explore later. But the other way to look at things is a score. And that a score would be used to identify triggers that for action or intervention. So the Justice 40 index, for example, is a score that says if you score over this certain amount, if you score over this certain level, it triggers certain benefits. So I want us to be intentional about how we're using this information and whether we are using ranks or scores. And the tables, the evaluation tables, can be used to calculate both. I have another slide on ranks and scores. We can go to that and then take questions. So the ranking system that I have proposed, the Prometheus system, balances among indicators and areas to do the ranking, and it avoids that weighted counting that just summing across the row does. Whereas if we're going for a score, the summations could be just fine. Or we sum within domains and then do the scores that way. So like I said, the evaluation tables will allow us to do both, but we just have to be mindful of how we use those results. Any questions about that?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how I'm on my browser because I'm on a new computer and I'm trying to figure out how to raise my hand here. But in any case, both of those ranking and scoring, they still both have the inherent problem of only having data where federal. Please correct me if I'm mixing up different things here, but those scores and things are based on information about federal disaster relief, and with the specialty crops in Oregon that might be too small to qualify for that type of larger federal relief are not counted in that base data, right?
Yes, in the FEMA National Risk Index, that is true. But when we build our evaluation tables, if we can find data about those specialty crops, we can include them in the evaluation tables.
And that's the key. Yeah. If we can figure that out, I'll try my best to do whatever I can to help in that way. But I know it's difficult because we don't generally keep that data.
Exactly. So let's go back to those evaluation tables for a moment. One of the opportunities we have in doing this risk assessment for the state is that we don't have to use national data if we don't want to. The National Risk Index was meant to have a national base. We're going to have a state base, and we can even do it regionally. So if we have better state data hasn't been rolled up into the federal census or other data sets, we can certainly use that, and we should use it.
Gotcha. We'll see what we can find.
Exactly. Okay, so any questions about our task over the next several months? I'll reiterate what it is. We are going to be collecting information on these worksheets about hazards, exposure, and vulnerability indicators. Then we will be taking that information and developing appropriate, or we will take that information and brainstorm indicators. We will then winnow down that brainstorm of indicators into sets for each hazard and build these evaluation tables. That's our task between now and roughly February. Any questions, comments?
Is everybody still breathing?
Spontaneous respiration is a different type of indicator.
Yes. It's going to be a lot of work, okay? I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's going to be a lot of work. But I'm hoping that by organizing information using these worksheets and dividing us up into small work groups that we can tackle this together. Okay. Oh, we can forget that. That's an error that should have been taken out. Well, unless you want to talk about it, let's go back. Okay, so at the last meeting, go ahead, Marian.
Sorry. Mike Howard put in the chat a question about the low reliability of a lot of the tract level census-based data.
Yes.
And I thought you might want to respond to that.
Actually, I think somebody from PSU is on here that can talk about that and their marvelous tool about. Is Ethan on? Ethan, can you share your tool? The link to your tool? You might not be listening. So Portland State University is developing a tool to help evaluate the reliability of census data. And they have a beta test site out now that can be used to evaluate that. And Mike's absolutely right. In the low population areas, sometimes the error bands around the census data is bigger than the number that's presented as the answer. So Ethan's tool can help evaluate that kind of problem. And maybe somebody can put that in the chat if they have the link handy.
What is the tool called? I can try and find it.
I can't remember what it's called. You can find the link in the minutes. Oh no, I don't have it mount yet.
Yes, when I was away during this, I'll paste it again.
Okay, please do, Ethan, and tell me if I got the description incorrect.
No, I think that's right. It's got several different capabilities, and one of which it does have a viewer. We've come up with kind of our own definitions of what we consider reliable or unreliable. And you're right, in a lot of rural areas, tracts aren't reliable. There are some things we can do to get around that or to improve the situation. We can combine multiple years of ACS data. So, for things that change very rapidly over time, that doesn't work very well. But in some cases, that can help solve the problem. And then, right, yeah. So I'll pop that information in the link. And we don't really have a name for it right now. It's kind of like an equity index map tool or something, just generally. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Ethan. And while you're on the line, I had another question. And this came up yesterday in a conversation at our staff meeting. There are census tracts that have very disparate populations. Like it may be one census tract that has a very well-off population, a very poor population within the same area. Are there ways to identify those areas using the parts of the census to say this area has a disparate group of people in it?
There's a couple of different things we can do. Yeah. So what I heard is like a situation in which maybe within a tract, so tracts are kind of somewhat arbitrarily defined,
yeah,
and include, areas that are radically different. So
yeah,
one thing we can do would be to go below the tract. So, if we have data reliability issues at the tract, they get even worse when we go below, but we can look at block group by block group, and that can at least give us a relative standing of areas within block groups. So block groups nest within tracts. They are smaller areas. And then in some cases, we may be able to get an indication even from data that's available at the block level. For example, like on age, race, ethnicity, and so on, like how some of those characteristics might be allocated within a tract. We also have other units besides tracts that sometimes are a little more tied to meaningful geographies. There's a type of geography that I encourage folks to look at a lot because it's rarely ever heard or used, but it's called census county divisions.
Mm-hmm.
There are stable divisions of counties that have existed since 1960 that are kind of organized around population centers. Sometimes the data is more limited because, of course, when we're talking about a county that may only be one tract for that whole county, that county still may be divided up into multiple census county divisions, but then that just means there may be very limited data available for those areas.
Right. Yeah, so this risk assessment project, will be working with PSU and Ethan on some of these issues as well. So, okay, so at the last meeting, I introduced a method that does ranking, and I shared a few papers that describe the method, and I'm wondering if anyone had time to read them, and if they did, if they have any questions. And if you don't, it's okay. We don't have to make this decision right away. I just wanted to know touch base with folks if they've looked at it. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. All right, before we move on, I have a couple other questions for you. Does anyone want to look at the worksheets that I have developed? Or are you comfortable just looking at them in the box on your own time? Anyone?
I'll probably look at them in box on my own time. This is Mike.
We do have one request to look at them.
Why don't we take a look at the hazards one, if we can, just to give an idea of what we're doing.
Can someone steer which document are you asking me to
are you in box?
I am in the meeting
okay
materials.
Meeting materials, there's a PDF for a hazards worksheet.
Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah,
if you can just bring that up.
I think you're going to have to download it.
That's okay, we'll get there.
Or I could share my own screen and show the Google Forms, if that would be better.
That would be.
It would be? Okay.
I have it right here.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Can y'all see this? Yeah.
No.
Ish.
More. Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
So what I did was I built these worksheets. Now it's blank in Google Forms. Okay. And the reason I did that is because Google Forms outputs into an Excel spreadsheet. So the forms allow me to go through step by step, basically, to build spreadsheets. And you can see here on the screen that the natural hazards, it's a drop-down box because I want each form to relate to one hazard. And then we can scroll down a little bit. So the user gets, so this is the list of hazards. It's not the full form. So we can go through that now. Don't get rid of it. That's the one I was trying to bring up earlier. So we had a hazard called coastal hazards. So I broke it down into coastal erosion, coastal flooding, coastal landslides. And then this is just alphabetical. Then we have the dam failure, the drought, dust storms, earthquakes. There are several different kinds of earthquakes, so I broke those down. Extreme heat, riverine flooding, which is separate from coastal flooding, landslides, 2 different kinds of tsunamis, volcanic activity, wildfire smoke, which is not a separate hazard, but it's being described within the wildfire chapter. Wildfire debris flows after fire, wildfire floods after fire, or floods after wildfire, and landslides after fire. Straight line winds, tornadoes. I think there's another page that has windstorms and other things, but you could see that I broke out the 12 hazards into their subhazards, and we ended up with a couple dozen of them. So then there's another worksheet that has the actual form.
Go down that one.
This one?
Yeah.
No, the one that says natural hazards, that one.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so the natural hazards worksheet, which DLCD will fill in the bulk of the information, but we will be asking you to fill in what we don't know. It has the drop down for each hazard, a brief description of what it is. And that gets to Curtis's point. Is there a description of what the subhazards are? Yes, we'll fill that.
I was just writing an answer to that.
Okay.
The subhazards are described in each of the hazard chapters in the NHMP.
Yes.
And I think there may be some that we haven't put in the NHMP before. We haven't put tornadoes, for example. but that's where most of the subhazards are coming from.
Right. So we're asking if this is a framework data set. In other words, has it been vetted by the state framework, the DASGEO framework team, and therefore is considered the authoritative source? Or is it some other authoritative source? Is the hazard affected by climate change? What is the data's spatial projection? What attributes are included in the data set that describe that hazard? Is it linked to another hazard? Who developed it? What is its vintage? How often is it updated? Are there digital maps available? Some hazards don't actually have digital maps, but most of them do. What is the format? Is it polygon, points, lines, raster, or something else? What is the spatial scale? Does it describe intensity, duration, or probability in that data set? Are there any use restrictions, and just anything else we need to know about it? So like I said, these worksheets are essentially metadata. And then at the very end of the worksheet, we'll ask, where can we find this data? Yeah, sorry, when you do the PDF, it makes a bunch of extra pages. So where's the data located? Where can we find it?
And there's a question from Curtis if there's a definition for each of the subhazards.
Right, we answered that question, that they mostly come from the state plan.
Any others that you want to look at?
Sure, let's look at the vulnerability one.
Hang on, before we move on, I had a question.
Yeah.
Yes. What was it now? Oh, I didn't see anything in there about the extent of the data.
I think there's a question in there about that.
Okay. I just missed it, I guess.
If there isn't, I'll make sure it's in there. I had it like.
I mean, because to me, scale is a little different. The projection, I thought maybe that might be a misstatement.
Okay, well, maybe.
Yeah, it's also a core part of FEMA's definition for vulnerability and hazard vulnerability.
Yeah, I think maybe this might be an old version that doesn't have extent in it, but I will write that down to make sure that gets put on the form.
For the climate change, is it related to climate change or linked to climate change? The term was for coastal hazards that are going to be exacerbated by sea level rise. Do we just treat that as related to climate change, or is there a separate way you'd like to address that, since it's really a subset?
I'm treating it as a climate change moderated hazard.
Great, thanks.
But like I said, DLCD is going to fill out all of these worksheets to the extent we can, using the information that we already have in the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan and other places. And then we'll circulate these for your refinement comments. So if we go to the vulnerability worksheets, that's going to be a little bit different because we don't have a lot of this information, okay? This is newish. So on the vulnerability worksheets, again, we ask you to identify what hazards this indicator addresses. And in many cases, it can be multiple hazards. So it's a check as many boxes as it applies to situation. Its name and excuse me, and what this indicator, how this indicator relates to a vulnerability or strategy or policy intervention. I think one of my goals is not to include a bunch of indicators that don't relate to a policy intervention or a mitigation strategy of some sort, unless there's a really good reason to do it. So for example, population over 65 is a really good indicator, and it might be useful, but we can't do anything about it, right? So we want to limit the number of those kinds of indicators, and then really focus on those that we can do something about. And then what asset category or what pillar or domain does this belong to? and I need to put governance in there because I thought about that one later. What's the source? What kind of numeric value is it? Is it a raw number, an index, some kind of calculation? If it is a calculation, what is it? What is that calculation? Is it an indicator that we want more of, or is it an indicator that we want less of, so that we know how to normalize them properly? How old is it? What's its vintage? How often is it collected? And another question that I need to add in there is what the time frame, how many times it's been collected over time. Like, is it a one-time thing, or is it being collected every 2 years for 20 years or whatever? So I want to put that in there. Does it have a spatial scale? And then again, it's use restrictions and anything else that we might need to know about that indicator. We're not opposed to using indicators that have use restrictions, but we need to know about them, because there possibly are some that we don't want to use straight out of the box for privacy reasons. So that's what
there's a comment in the chat as well.
Okay.
Which I think is possible. If we can do people getting older.
That was
yeah.
Sorry.
Older populations are definitely a vulnerability indicator.
I know, but you said, wouldn't it be okay? Never mind. Forget it. Sorry, I said something.
Matt put a joke in the chat.
Oh.
He said, wouldn't it be great if we could do something about people getting older?
Yeah, it would be wonderful. That would be great.
Let's find
out. But you know, we sort of can, because just being old by itself doesn't make you vulnerable. It's the health status or your other social connections and other things that contribute to the vulnerability with age.
And if you look at one of the most common effects is simply loss of, you run out of prescription meds or loss of access to basic outpatient services. And
precisely,
that's exactly the type of thing that we address. So, that type of vulnerability is relevant. We can't address the underlying cause, but then again, we're not trying to cure poverty either. We're trying to look at why that's an important indicator.
That's exactly right, Jeff. So that's what I'm meaning about, we need to, after we brainstorm all these, we need to think, is this something that we have a policy handle or lever that we can use, or is there something else that we can use that catches that, but we do have a policy lever? So that will be one of the things we have to think about.
Hey, Chris, this is Matt again. Sorry, I have to make up for my joke for distracting everyone. But yeah, so like for example, in the tsunami evacuation, whatever it's called, shoot, I forget the name of it. It's the evacuation. It's the speed you have to attain to. I forget what it's called. But anyways, that the age, the population age is also factored into that level of risk. Because, elderly people aren't expected to move as fast as other people, younger people.
Yeah, I can't get to that 7-minute mile anymore, as hard as I try.
The pedestrian evacuation tool USGS has, I think, is based, the defaults are usually 30-minute miles, 2 miles an hour. But the pedestrian evac tool incorporates terrain and vegetation as well. So it somewhat addresses that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's what this worksheet does. Again, all of these worksheets are aimed at collecting metadata and not so much collecting the data. After we determine what we're going to use, then we'll go ahead and collect the data, because I don't want to go into a big data collection exercise for stuff we're not going to use. And I guess since we're on this track and we have time, let's look at the asset one as well.
This one?
No, that works. It's fine. That's good.
Okay.
Yeah, so there is also an asset overlay worksheet. And again, I want to emphasize these are draft, and I urge you to go into the Box site and take a look at them. And if there's something missing or it's confusing, let us know, because this is really going to drive our data collection. And I want to make sure we get it right as right as possible out of the box. So, yeah, so what is the exposed asset? A brief description of it, what category of asset is described, and if there's a drop-down menu there that talks about whether it's building, infrastructure. There's a big, huge, long list of different kinds of categories of asset. Could be people, could be lifeline, so on and so forth. And then go back up a little bit. There's a question: is the asset required to be addressed in a state natural hazard mitigation plan? And again, as we're going through and I share these worksheets with you, if you don't know the answer to something, you can just leave it blank, and it's a gap that I or someone else will have to fill out by consulting with someone else. So who develops and maintains this asset data set? Yeah, who owns and manages the asset? Is it private, local, state, federal? If it's an asset, if the asset class is people, what kind of limitations or considerations are associated with that? Is there a map for this particular asset? If so, is it statewide or is it partial? What is its scale? Again, the vintage, how often is it updated? So you can see there's a lot of overlap in the questions, but yeah, and this one, is it tabular or spatial? Because a lot of them can just be tabular data sets for this particular category. And then the licensing restrictions and anything else that we want to know. So I guess I'm going to say it one more time. Please take a look at these worksheets. And if there's a question that I didn't catch or that I didn't capture, please let me know.
And you'll probably have to download PDFs because if your system for some reason doesn't open the Adobe RStudent, then you'll be asked to open Box Tools, and we don't want you to do that. So just go ahead and download it.
Right. Yes, and some of the links that people have shared here, that's great to send to me as well, because to the maximum extent possible, I want to be able to fill in what I can in these worksheets so that it's not left entirely up to the work group. Tsunami is actually a hazard by itself. Andrew? In the natural hazard mitigation plan.
Oh, are you asking me what?
No, Andrew asked if tsunami is a subset of coastal hazards.
No.
No, it's a hazard by itself in the state plan.
Do we have any control over that?
You can make a suggestion.
I mean, it's certainly exacerbated by sea level rise.
That is true. That's true.
And while it requires evacuation planning different from the other hazards, sea level rise, erosion, and general coastal topography and other information on coastal vulnerability that would apply to most of the other hazards also apply to tsunami, particularly in terms of evac. Seems kind of strange to treat that by itself, particularly since it's also related to offshore earthquake. So interesting way of doing it.
Well, let's back up a little bit. In the natural hazard mitigation plan, it is treated in a separate chapter. In our evaluation tables, we do not have to treat it as a separate chapter.
Okay.
We can link things together.
That's
so
right.
if I didn't make it clear, those evaluation tables don't have to address only one hazard. We can combine hazards together and just do a bigger evaluation table.
Back to the slides?
Sure, yes, please. Okay, so I didn't hear any questions about the Promethi method, so we can move on, but I do urge you to take a look at those papers that I sent. And I do have a spreadsheet that demonstrates how it works. I believe that's in the box as well from last meeting, so you could take a look at that. Okay, declarations of collaboration. Okay, so we are going to ask each of your participating agencies to tell us how much effort they are allowed or can contribute to this risk assessment, and eventually also to the hazard mitigation plan. And so in order to capture that information and to memorialize it over the course of many years, the several years it will take to do this risk assessment, we are asking each agency to articulate what they can do and in a declaration of collaboration. So last week on the 16th, before the 16th, I sent out a declaration of collaboration form and asked folks to tell me after they read it over who I should contact to negotiate the terms and conditions of those commitments. I heard from a few of you. I need to hear more, and I will start bothering you about who I should contact in your organization that has the authority to negotiate these declarations of collaboration. I'm not gonna go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll wait till you're done.
I was going to say, we need to start the data collection before all these declarations of collaboration are signed. We can't, they're going to have to happen on a single track or on a double track. So, yeah. So I'm not going to hold off and wait to ask you for information about the data before these are signed, but we do want to memorialize what your agency can do over the course of the project through these declarations of collaboration.
One of the things that'll tell us is where we have gaps, where we still need help. And the other thing I wanted to mention is it's not just for state agencies. Mm-hmm. Anybody can do this with us, whether you're with an agency or organization or with a tribe. We really like to talk with all of you and, and have as much participation in this as we can.
Any questions about these? Okay. So before we move on to summarize what our tasks are, I'd like to hear from the group if anyone has any concerns about the approach that they've seen today or suggestions. It's kind of an open discussion. And also, if you haven't looked at the work plan in box, please do so. It's still in draft. If you have any questions about it, let's talk about it. Just give me a call or send me an email.
We could ask Tricia. Oh, Max, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just want to maybe say hi and introduce myself.
Yes.
Christine and Marianne, we had talked a few weeks ago now, and just for the group's knowledge and awareness, I work at the Oregon Department of Energy, and amongst other things, we are in the process of working on the state's energy security plan, which includes a risk assessment to energy assets, which is pretty similar to what's going to be happening here. And so I think our timelines will align well to be able to provide you with a really good data set for use in this project. But anyway, just wanted to say hi and let you know that I'm part of your team now.
Awesome. Thank you. Glad to have you.
Yeah, thanks.
I guess we do have time. We could walk through the work plan if you want to. Is that what you were going to say, Marion?
No, actually, I was going to say to take a look at the facilities, the list of.
Oh, the list of assets. Yes, we could do that. And also let's look at the SMEs. Let's do that. Okay, so actually let's start with the SMEs. So one of our next steps will be to identify small groups who can start working on these worksheets and on the data collection and anything else related to the hazards. And in order to facilitate that, Marion has put together, thank you, Marion, a list of people who have participated in these meetings and in the natural hazard mitigation plan before, into categories of groups that we could
No.
Go back to where you were. The SME summary. This is the giant list.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is by far not everybody who's been in these meetings, but these are supposed to be small groups and it's just a start. So don't feel like you're not welcome if your name isn't here.
Correct. So over the next week or so, or next week, I am going to start building these small groups. And this list will be my starting point. And as Marion said, if your name's not on the list, one of these lists, that's doesn't mean you're excluded. We really need everyone's participation. So I do see some people on the call here that I know are not on this list.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps if you can put in the chat where your area of expertise is, what kind of hazard in particular your expertise lies, or if it's in social vulnerability or some other natural resources, cultural resources, that would be really helpful. Thanks, Steve. Yes. Is this list in Box yet?
No.
Okay. We can put it in Box so that you can see who is on the list. But on this call today, if you have a particular expertise or area of interest that you'd like to contribute, please put it in the chat so that I can build these small groups.
It will be in Box by the end of today.
Okay, wonderful. And like I said, starting next week, I'm going to start calling folks to build these small groups so that we can start filling out these worksheets.
Oh, Andrew, great.
Yes, wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Okay.
And despite me being by myself down there at the bottom, I work well with others, I promise.
Yeah. We haven't gotten a lot of uptake on the GIS area that we've been asking about for some time. So that would be helpful.
It is an area that we need some expertise.
I think that this is on Box, right? This was in our meeting materials.
Oh, did I put it in the meeting materials for today?
Mm-hmm. And so I can.
Okay. Well, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's great. So,
okay. Well, don't look at it until the end of the day because I'm going to fix it before then.
So I urge you all to go into Box and look at the list and see. You can make a note right in the spreadsheet about whether you think that's an appropriate category for you or not. Add your name. Um, let us know where you want to participate in that spreadsheet so I can start building these teams. Any questions? Thanks, folks. Thanks for putting stuff in here in the chat. It's really helpful.
Great.
Sorry,
yeah, Max, there's this.
Can I just put the link in the chat and people can vote or no?
No, not.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
I'll send out tonight when it's finished, when we update it with this material from today. So, and then we'll send out a note that it's there for everybody.
Yes.
Okay. So Max, the answer to your question is yes, it'll go under, I think we'll just call it hazardous materials. Would that work?
Yeah, that's good. That's typically where we get housed under ESF 10 is hazardous. Then nuclear radiological risk is in there.
Okay.
Under an ESF structure, at least.
Yeah, we've never included anything but natural hazards in the natural hazard mitigation plan before, but this time around our new guidance says we need to include hazardous materials. So this is new for us.
It is just one occasion when there was a cleanup of sometimes fire debris. Sometimes it gets scanned or should get scanned for radiological risk. So there might be a connection there, but that's just one thing that comes to mind.
Okay. Great. Okay, thanks for this. And so now I guess we can move on to the list of assets, which is another one of our next steps. As Marion mentioned, we put this list together using notes from previous meetings of this group, from the FEMA requirements and what was in our natural hazards mitigation plan already.
And also from the survey.
And from the survey, okay.
The survey of end users. And we have not yet memorialized the conversation that we had with Curtis about how else we could serve response and recovery by mitigation.
Okay. So, Tricia, can you bring up that asset list if you're...
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't know where you wanted me to be.
Yeah. This is a huge list.
Which list are you meaning?
I'm not sure it's in Box yet.
No, it's right there. That one.
Oh, okay, that's it. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Do you want to describe this, Marion?
Can you make the pad bigger? That's good. Okay, so these are the FEMA required assets. We took some of the ones that so you'll notice back up a minute. You'll notice that the big lifeline is safety and security. Under safety and security, there are a number of components. Government services, if you can scroll down a little bit, law enforcement, fire services. There were a few others that we had determined as a group that we couldn't include or didn't want to include for whatever reason. Mostly that they're not mappable things. And so we had a big long list. I'm sorry, I'm not doing this very well. Okay, can you scroll up again a little bit just to the top of that column? Thanks. So there are a number of subcomponents also that FEMA identifies. So emergency operations centers, essential government functions, government offices, National Guard, schools, and some other things. So we were fitting what we could mitigate under the subcomponents. And when we took a look at what we thought were optional, things that we had identified as, yeah, and this is what Oregon would like, we realized that many of these subcomponent titles, like government offices and military facilities and schools, could be further broken down. And we have some leeway here to define them as we'd like. So many of the optional items that we came up with, we have fit now under the FEMA required categories because they fit under the subcomponents. So we have very few actual optional items left over.
Okay.
Okay, so
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's your Granges, fairgrounds, shelters, commercial housing facilities, hotels, stormwater, wastewater, drinking water. Now, just because it's on this list doesn't mean that we're going to address it, but we wanted to start out with a comprehensive list that we could then edit if we needed to.
So an example was under the agriculture things that we just scrolled by. FEMA's topic was livestock feeding facilities, water, and food. And so we fit other pieces under that. I think FEMA also mentioned both pets and livestock. So we've divided those out. And we added agricultural product processing and distribution facilities and agricultural supply facilities and animal sheltering and the CAFOs, the concentrated animal feeding operations. Those were all things that originally were under our optional, our desired, what Oregon wants to put in there, but they fit under FEMA's category, so we moved them up. So that's just one example.
So yes, the health and medical includes things like the hospitals and clinics, but also laboratories, mortuaries, medical supply, manufacturing and distribution. And here's our powered fuel.
Now you come to my spot.
Yes.
Deanna Henry works on my team, so you've got the Odo perspective here.
Good, good. So what we're trying to do in this spreadsheet as well is begin to identify the sources of that information. So,
and a lot of that was taken from our notes also, from the good work that you guys did back in June or July.
Yeah, right. Very good. We'll be able to help with this in the coming months as our own security plan comes together, energy security plan.
That's awesome. Okay. We have our communications tools, satellite receivers, data centers. Yeah. This is an area where we have a lot of questions about the availability of information, and any insight you can offer would be helpful.
Also a particularly useful focus for the interdependency concept.
Mm-hmm. Community lifelines of transportation. I think Kat Silva's on, and I have looked at their risk assessment, which is going to be really helpful in this category. The climate change risk assessment.
Here are the cultural facilities.
Yeah, we still have a little work to do on natural resources and archaeological and so on, articulating those kinds of assets.
So the social vulnerability category here are things that people brought up that in the long discussion that we had over the summer and also through the survey that are more like indicators than actual places we might map.
Okay. This is all the hazard stuff. We talked about that already.
And then this green part is the optional. So here we have the food banks, the grocery stores, different shelters. Some of that you can see is duplicated.
So you can see we still have a lot of work to do to refine this list, add, subtract, combine. But again, this is our task for the next 3 months. One of them.
All right. So, Chris, can you speak to the relationship between this and the worksheets?
Yeah.
So worksheet.
Again, the worksheets are going to help me build a more not refined, more detailed spreadsheets. So I will take this information and start the worksheets. But this spreadsheet doesn't have all the metadata that we need. So this spreadsheet is a starting point to get the worksheets going.
And so then in the end, we'll be looking at what we can reasonably include from this list given the data that we can come up with.
That's correct. Yep. Yeah, we might want to start with this list and decide what we want to run through the worksheets, because I don't want to collect a bunch of information we're not going to use to the extent possible.
Also, this worksheet has not been updated with the outcome of our conversation with Curtis. And we're also still looking for some additional information from Sarah Pulse, who's not available this week. So this will change.
Yep, everything will change. It's a work in progress. Okay, so any questions about the asset that we just shared, or the SME worksheets? So our intention is to keep this information continuously updated in Box. So that will be your go-to place to figure out where we are. And if you have questions or comments you want to make in the documents in Box, please feel free to do so. Or you can email or telephone me. When the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan update grant comes through, Marion will need to step back from some of these organizing tasks, and we'll have to spend more time on that project. So I will essentially be the point of contact for the risk assessment, and Tricia will be my backup, and as well as Marion. So the three of us will be your DLCD points of contact, but I will essentially be running the small group meetings to fill in the worksheets and get the data collected. Okay. We do have an opportunity for the public to comment on what they've heard today. Are we ready to do that, Marion?
I'm sorry, what?
The public comment?
Oh, sure.
I think we've talked about this. Yep.
Is there anybody here from the public who would like an opportunity to speak? Hearing none, we can move forward. Oh, next week you're going to be, I don't know if I heard you talk about the next full group meetings.
No, we didn't talk about that
Okay,
yet.
so go ahead and talk about that.
Well, next week we're going to be sending some doodle polls out to find some meeting dates in January and March. And if you remember what our schedule looked like, we have some targets in January and March that we need to stick to so that we can stay on schedule. So our next full group meetings will be just going over the information that we've collected. That will be the January meeting, and then in March we'll share the initial run of our model. So it's pretty aggressive, but that's our look for those doodle polls to get those meetings on your calendar. These meetings will be in addition to the small group meetings. So you can't just sit back and wait for January.
Right.
But do look out for those so we can get those on your calendars, because they will again be inflection points in the schedule. Okay, any last comments, concerns?
You're welcome, Marianne. We learn a lot too. I would just like to thank everybody for hanging in here with us for these months and coming to so many meetings and being so productive and participatory. And we really hope that you will continue to support this work.
Okay, look forward to a bunch of emails from me. One for the declarations of collaboration, one for the small group meetings. And probably a bunch of other things that I'm going to ask for.
I'm sorry.
Okay, and Ashley will be sending the doodle poll. Okay.
And then what else did you say since I was speaking over you? I'm sorry.
No, that's it. And I was just going to say any other questions I might have.
Okay. Then we are adjourned.